Hello and welcome to this module where we look at the concept of the critical path. I'm sure you will all understand when somebody says this project is now critical, it basically means that it cannot be delayed anymore. So when you are talking about a critical path, it is a series of tasks that are going to push out or that are going to delay the project's end date or finish date if any of those tasks were delayed. So in other words, each task is critical because it cannot be delayed. The moment you delay any one of those tasks, it also delays the rest of the project. So if you'd like to make your project plan shorter, in other words, you want to shorten its duration, you start by shortening, or what we call crushing, the critical path. So you look for those items that are on the critical path and you see how you can make one or more of them shorter. So that is the only way that you can have the whole project plan to become shorter. So as you implement tasks, the critical path will also be changing, because when you finish a task, say ahead of time, or you finish a task late, you either delay the whole project or you create more time for the project. So if we finish one day early, it means that we have more time and we can start the next task earlier, thereby causing the finish date to also be one day earlier. On the other hand, if we finish a particular task one day late, it means we've delayed the next task by a day, and because of the domino effect, it will delay all the other tasks until the finish date or end date of the whole project also delays by a day. MS Project will automatically recalculate the critical path even if we never display it. So the fact that you have not gone to see the critical path doesn't mean it's not there. It's being calculated and recalculated all the time, regardless of whether you displayed it or not. So once a task which is on the critical path is completed, that task is no longer critical because it does not affect the plan's finish date anymore. So once we finish that particular task, it can no longer delay the project because it is done. So the critical path is always starting from the point where we are to the end of the project. So when we start the project, the critical path will start right from the first task to the last one. But when we are in the middle of the project, the critical path starts there at the middle of the project where we are to the end of the project. For us to understand critical path better, we need to talk about what we call slack. Slack talks about looseness. Take, for example, when you wear an oversized shirt or an oversized dress, you can pull your shirt or your dress away from your body, and the further you go without stretching it, we say it has got more slack. And a dress or shirt that does not have slack will be so tight, like those skinny jeans. They do not have any slack. So when we talk about slack on a project plan, we are talking about the flexibility of a task to start and finish without affecting the end date of a project. So when we look at a single task, we say it has got slack if it doesn't affect the next task or the whole project plan. So there are two types of slack. The first one is called free slack. Free slack is the amount of time that a task can be delayed before it delays another task. So in other words, before it delays the next task. The fact that it's delaying the next task doesn't necessarily mean it has delayed the whole project, because the next task itself might also have a lot of slack. So meaning it can be delayed without affecting the project. But when we talk of total slack, we are talking about the total amount of time that a task can be delayed before it delays the plan as a whole. So basically, the total slack of a task will be the total free slack of all the tasks from that particular one to the end of the project. So meaning that this particular task has been delayed so much that it has eaten up all the slack of the remaining tasks. So once that task has been delayed by the total slack, then it means that you cannot afford to delay any one of the subsequent tasks. You might think, how do we determine if a task is on the critical path or not? A task will be on the critical path if its slack is less than or equal to a certain threshold, and that threshold is typically or usually 0. In other words, this task does not have slack. This task cannot be delayed, so it becomes a member of the critical path. So typically, non-critical tasks have slack, meaning they can start or finish earlier or later within their slack time without affecting the completion date of the plan. Next, we are going to look at how we can display the critical path on MS Project. So the critical path is not something that we create. It's already there. It's already being calculated by MS Project. The only thing that we can do is actually display it. So we do it in the same way that we displayed the task path. For us to display the critical path, we need to go back to the Format tab. Now on the Format tab, we go to Bar Styles, and there is a checkbox that says Critical Tasks. So notice the formatting that we have at the moment down here before we click on the critical tasks. So you can see that the critical tasks have now been identified from this point onwards. So the reason is because right here we have got some slack of 3 days. So this slack of 3 days gives flexibility for any of these tasks to be delayed. So we can actually delay this task by 3 days. We can delay that task by 3 days. We can delay this task by 3 days. So the cumulative delay has to be a total of 3 days. So if we delay this one by 2 days, it means the remaining slack is 1 day, meaning we can only delay this task by 1 day. So you can see that these two have got a start to start relationship, meaning the start of this task is dependent on the start of the other or its predecessor task. So since the duration of buying of materials is shorter, it means that the critical item here is not the buying of materials because it's very short. The critical item is digging of the foundation, which is much longer. So when we are talking about slack, we are basically talking about the slack of this particular item, which is the critical item. So this is how MS Project basically determines which items go on the critical path or not, because it analyzes the effect of delaying each item and sees which of the tasks are more likely to delay the project as a whole. You might also want to display slack for the non-critical items. So in other words, you want to see how much free time there is on those items that are flexible. So what we do is we go back to the Format tab, and then still on the bar styles, you see there is a Slack checkbox. So you click on Slack. It has added these lines here, and it's showing you the amount of slack that is there. So if we remove that slack, you can see the lines disappearing. So those lines indicate slack. Still on the Format menu, you can see that the third item says late tasks. It now looks at the date today versus the start date of these items, and then it checks which items or which tasks have started yet. Did they start on time, before time, or after time? So the late tasks checkbox shows us the items that have been delayed. So when you click on it, you can see that it is literally showing me all the items up to here, because my date today is the 17th of November, and this last task, which is saying delayed, was supposed to have started already by the 1st of November. So all the ones that are starting after 17 November, they do not have this gray color. So it's only applied to those tasks whose start date has already passed, but we have not indicated that they have actually started. So I'll turn off the late tasks. Now we are back to normal. So remember, these are just switches. The moment you click it, it removes that effect. So it's up to you what you want to see at that particular time. So that is why this tab is for formatting, because it changes the appearance of your plan, the appearance of your Gantt chart. Earlier on, I indicated that a task is considered critical when its slack is equal to 0 days. But however, there are times when the time or duration you have for the project is so long that you can afford to have some delays in between. So you see how many tasks you have and calculate their total duration. That will now tell you what is the total amount of slack available from the whole duration from start to end of the period that you have. Then you can divide the total slack by the number of tasks so that you determine the average slack per task. So that average slack per task, you can then set it as the threshold for critical items, meaning that if the item delays for longer than its average slack, it is now starting to eat into the slack of the other items. So in that case, your slack threshold is no longer 0 because you can actually afford to have slack because of the long duration that you have. So in order to change that slack threshold, we go to the options. So that is on the File tab. Then we click on Options. We go to Advanced. Then we need to look for Calculation Options for this project. Down here. Calculation Options for this project. Then we need to go down. Tasks are critical if slack is less than or equal to. This is where we can then set and say tasks become critical when slack is less than or equal to 2 days. So when you say OK, it's now going to change the way that it determines which items are critical items. But for now, I'm not going to save this change. I will return it to the default of 0. It is very rare for you to find a situation where you need to change this threshold for critical items, because normally we want the threshold to be 0, meaning that critical items must not have any slack. So we can close by clicking OK. What you need to do is to check on your own plan and view the critical path. So remember, it's simply going to Format. Then on the bar styles, you simply click on Critical Path. So this is a toggle switch that turns the critical path on and off. So once you're done with that exercise, you can save your file before you go to the next module.